The announcement arrived like thunder across Earth's skies. For the first time in the long history of the Galactic War College, humanity had been invited. The institution was a crucible where the most warlike and ancient civilizations sent their brightest to be trained in strategy, combat, and leadership. Empires whose navies spanned star clusters considered attendance not just an honor, but a declaration of strength. For humanity, it was a message. The galaxy no longer ignored them. Yet the weight of that message was suffocating, because it also meant humanity would be judged. When the shuttle descended toward the colossal spires of the War College, the human delegation stared in awe. Vast towers carved of living stone rose above alien landscapes. Species of every shape and physiology walked the grounds. Colossi with crystalline skin, serpentine scholars draped in robes woven from bioluminescent fibers, insectoid tacticians whose chittering jaws never stopped clicking. All converged to study war at the highest level. Humans looked small in comparison. Their bodies seemed fragile, their lifespans insignificant, their weapons archaic. Murmurs followed them as they passed through the halls. Some aliens laughed outright. To them, the human presence was a curiosity, a temporary distraction that would collapse under pressure. The first introductions were brutal. Cadets of the draft consortium mocked human musculature as underdeveloped, claiming their bones would snap under training loads. Asura generals' offspring sneered that humans would not even survive the climate-controlled arenas designed for species evolved in volcanic or frozen wastelands. Even the faculty carried an air of dismissal, as if humanity had been admitted not for their merit but for entertainment. Humans listened in silence. They knew their history well enough to recognize the tone. The strong had always underestimated them, and every time it became a mistake. Orientation brought the first taste of alien pedagogy. Classes emphasized pure dominance, superior firepower, longer endurance, mathematical precision honed across millennia. A lecture on planetary sieges by a towering Phyrexian described how patience over centuries ensured inevitable conquest. Humans exchanged glances. They had never had centuries to waste. Their wars burned bright and fast, their victories achieved not by patience but by desperate improvisation. The curriculum felt alien in more ways than one, and whispers grew. Perhaps the humans simply could not keep up. Tension sharpened during practical drills. While most cadets relied on strength or refined technique perfected over eons, humans compensated with relentless questioning. Why march in formation if terrain broke the lines? Why commit heavy units when small teams could sow chaos? Why engage at predictable intervals when deception could fracture an enemy's morale? Their questions frustrated instructors, who expected obedience to tested doctrines. Yet even when reprimanded, humans continued analyzing, twisting, challenging. To other cadets, this behavior was unnerving. War was supposed to be order, but humans carried a strange aura. They treated war like a puzzle, not a ritual. Alien whispers began to change flavor. Curiosity turned to unease as fragments of human history spread among the cadets. Accounts of global wars fought with weapons that poisoned entire landscapes. Stories of nations reduced to ash in seconds. Chronicles of civilizations rising and falling in the span of mere centuries. How could a species so young already hold such a violent past? Some cadets dismissed it as exaggeration. Others remembered how their own empires had stagnated in cautious tradition, while humans had raced from fire to nuclear fire in less than a millennium. If even a fraction of the stories were true, then humanity was not a harmless guest. It was a storm waiting to be measured. One exchange during a tactics lecture became the spark that ignited rumor into fear. A Shurax cadet mocked humanity's childish wars, saying their battles lasted mere years, nothing compared to 1,000-year campaigns of elder empires. A human responded with chilling calm. Yes, but in those few years, we lost hundreds of millions and kept fighting until there was nothing left to burn. Can your people stomach that? The hall fell silent. The Shurax cadet had no answer. It was the first time many realized humans did not measure war in centuries because they had never been allowed to. They fought with immediacy, with desperation, with the understanding that tomorrow was never promised. The unease deepened as instructors prepared for the first grand simulation. It was to be a combat exercise testing reflex, discipline, and execution. The other species smirked, expecting an embarrassing collapse. Many believed humans would fail before the first phase ended. But the humans carried themselves differently. They were quiet, watchful, absorbing every detail of the rules. Their instructors mistook silence for nervousness, but in truth it was calculation. Humans knew what came next would not just be a test. It would be judgment, not only of them as cadets, but of humanity as a species. On the eve of the exercise, alien dormitories buzzed with gossip. Some cadets mocked, some pitted, some sharpened their claws with humiliation they thought inevitable. In the human quarters, however, the mood was steady. They spoke not of survival, but of opportunity. History had placed them here to prove something not with words, but with actions. They did not need to be the strongest. They only needed to show that when the galaxy confronted humanity, it would never forget the encounter. As the simulation chamber lit up with blinding alien technology, all eyes turned to the small human contingent. Frail bodies compared to the giants, limited lifespans compared to the ancients, crude physiology compared to the engineered. Yet beneath their fragile forms burned a will none could yet measure. The galaxy waited for spectacle of failure, unaware that what it would witness instead was a birth of fear. The chamber pulsed with artificial landscapes, shifting terrain, and adaptive obstacles, designed to test reflex and discipline under controlled chaos. Alien cadets marched into formations drilled into them for generations, their movements synchronized, their weapons gleaming with precision. The humans stood apart, smaller, quieter, absorbing every flicker of the environment. When the signal blared to begin, the expectation of failure hung heavy over them. What followed shattered the certainty of the crowd. The opening engagement was brutal. Hulking draft warriors charged in a line, shields locked, their formation an impenetrable wall perfected over centuries. By every metric of galactic doctrine, this was the optimal move. The human squad did not meet it head-on. Instead, they scattered into the terrain, breaking contact, refusing to grant the fight the structure draft demanded. They set ambush points, feigned retreats, and used crossfire from unpredictable angles. When a draft slammed into what appeared to be a fleeing human, the victim rolled under the shield, jammed the alien's footing with improvised debris, and the formation collapsed from within. To onlookers it seemed chaotic, dishonorable. To the humans, it was simply survival turned into strategy. The simulation recalibrated, shifting to an open plain meant to favor long-range precision. The Threxians deployed their artillery units with elegant timing, their fire coordinated to suppress and overwhelm. The humans did not compete with superior firepower. They went invisible in plain sight, blending movement with terrain irregularities, digging in, disappearing. Then they struck not at the enemy units, but at supply relays and command hubs. A Threxian officer found her control grid flickering, her timing disrupted, her perfect plan undone by attacks that made no tactical sense, until she realized the humans were not trying to win through dominance. They were unraveling the very concept of order. Word spread through the observation decks. Cadets muttered in disbelief. Instructors leaned forward, analyzing tactics that broke their rules yet succeeded regardless. Some dismissed it as reckless luck, but others whispered, "They adapt too fast. They fight like prey until they turn predator." The simulation layered in complexity, now involving multiple factions with shifting alliances. This was where humans truly thrived. While other cadets treated the exercise as a straightforward match of strength, humans embraced the chaos. They bluffed opponents into temporary truces, then betrayed them at critical moments. They sacrificed small squads to lure enemies into ambush zones. They sowed distrust among alliances with feigned signals and fabricated distress calls. Where alien cadets complained the humans cheated, instructors could not deny the results. Objectives captured, enemies neutralized, victories earned by turning uncertainty into a weapon. The most unnerving moment came when a sword champion challenged a human cadet to direct combat, tired of what he called cowards' tricks. The arena fell silent. The human stood across from a towering reptilian built for war, scales glistening, claws sharp enough to tear steel. When the fight began, the sword pressed with overwhelming power. The human stumbled, retreated, and appeared Cornered, spectators smirked, believing the spectacle was over. Then the human feigned collapse, baited the sword into overreaching and struck, not with strength but with precision, driving a strike into a vulnerable joint. The giant fell. The human stood breathless but victorious. Silence followed. What chilled the crowd was not the win itself, but the method. Playing weak until the perfect moment, then turning defeat into triumph. From that duel onward, the atmosphere shifted. No one laughed at humans anymore. They did not look like prey now. They looked like predators hiding behind fragile skins. Cadets whispered warnings to each other not to underestimate them. Instructors began debating openly whether humanity's inclusion in the college had been wise at all. A pattern emerged that unsettled everyone. Humans did not just win. They won in ways others did not anticipate, exploiting psychology, exploiting terrain, exploiting the enemy's very expectations. As simulations escalated, alien cadets grew more cautious around their human peers. The stories of Earth's history that once seemed exaggerated now rang true. A species that had burned itself nearly to extinction more than once, yet kept surviving, was now proving in real time that desperation was a forge no other empire had endured. Their unpredictability was not a flaw, but their greatest weapon. To fight them meant never feeling safe, never trusting victory until the last human fell. The final exercise of the section paired mixed species squads together. Many groaned at being placed alongside humans, fearing their reckless improvisation would doom the team. Instead, those paired with humans found themselves winning matches they never should have. The humans coordinated with an intensity that elevated allies, covering weaknesses, improvising solutions, and never yielding even when pinned. Those same allies emerged shaken, muttering afterward that fighting beside humans felt less like training and more like surviving a natural disaster. Terrifying, exhausting, but undeniably effective. By the end of the trials, the galaxy no longer saw humans as curiosities. They were a paradox, fragile yet relentless, chaotic yet precise, reckless yet effective. A dangerous whisper now spread to the halls of the War College, passing from cadet to cadet in tones of unease. The humans were not merely students. They were something else entirely. They were survivors who turned every weakness into a blade, and every defeat into the seed of victory. The galaxy had come expecting to laugh at their failure. Instead, it found itself staring at the shadow of something far more terrifying, a species that fought like it had nothing to lose, and in doing so, revealed why it could never be safely ignored. The final trials loomed with the weight of history. Unlike previous exercises, this was no simple battle or duel. It was a full-spectrum war simulation, spanning multiple environments and demanding both tactical brilliance and strategic foresight. Cadets were divided into factions and thrust into a galaxy-scale scenario that mirrored the chaos of real interstellar conflict. The expectation was clear. The test would reveal not only who could dominate but who could endure. For most species, it was an exhibition of power. For humans, it was a crucible where their true nature would be revealed. The scenario began with brutal imbalance. Human cadets were seated into the weakest position, with minimal resources, and surrounded by stronger rivals. It was an unspoken statement from the college. Prove yourselves or perish quietly. Other species smirked, already envisioning the collapse of the human contingent. But humans had long thrived in disadvantage. Rather than despair, they embraced their predicament as familiar territory. On Earth, they had clawed civilizations out of famine, plague, and scarcity. This was not a handicap. It was home. From the first moves, humans defied expectation. While other factions consolidated power through brute force, humans reached outward. They contacted minor cadet groups overlooked by the dominant factions, offering cooperation rather than submission. Where others threatened, they persuaded. Where others exploited, they inspired. Within days, they had rallied disparate outcasts into a coalition bound not by fear, but by a shared determination to survive. The irony was sharp. Species that had mocked humanity's fragility now found themselves following human leadership because, for the first time, someone spoke to them as equals rather than tools. Yet diplomacy was only one edge of their blade. In the shadows of the simulation, humans unleashed a torrent of unorthodox strategies. They used misinformation campaigns to trick stronger factions into fighting each other. They planted false signals, staged feigned retreats, and orchestrated betrayals that shattered alliances forged over centuries of training. Rivals accused them of dishonor, but the instructors observed in silence, knowing war had never cared for honor. It cared only for survival and victory. Every ambush, every trick, every gamble revealed a terrifying truth. Humans excelled not in stability, but in chaos. As the war dragged on, the contrast grew stark. The draft relied on unyielding formations, the Phyrexians on calculated firepower, the Soreth on brute strength, but all faltered once their assumptions crumbled. Against humans, assumptions had no purchase. No strategy was safe, no plan guaranteed. The unpredictability was corrosive, gnawing at the confidence of every opponent. Battles against humans ended not with glorious clashes, but with quiet dread. As soldiers realized too late, they had walked into a trap woven from desperation and cunning. The turning point came when the humans, outnumbered and outgunned, orchestrated a daring maneuver that stunned even the instructors. They deliberately abandoned their primary base, allowing it to be overrun. Rivals celebrated the apparent collapse, only to find themselves ambushed by coordinated human and coalition forces waiting in concealed positions. What should have been a final blow became a massacre, and the human-led alliance surged from the brink of defeat to sudden dominance. Spectators in the observation halls murmured in disbelief. It was one thing to improvise. It was another to sacrifice security itself, betting everything on the willingness to suffer loss for the chance at a decisive strike. No other species would have dared. Humans thrived in the gamble. Whispers became open fear. Instructors exchanged grim glances. The purpose of the War College was to prepare the galaxy's finest to face any enemy. Yet here, within their own walls, a species had emerged that embodied the very nightmare they trained against. Humanity's strength was not strength at all, but refusal to yield, a weaponization of desperation that turned every defeat into a new angle of attack. The final stage of the simulation pushed all factions into total war. The human coalition, though battered, fought with relentless ferocity. They maneuvered alliances like pieces on a board, striking at weak points, rallying allies who had nearly broken. In the climax, the humans achieved what no one had anticipated. They seized not only victory but dominance, reshaping the entire conflict around their methods. The scoreboard was irrelevant. What mattered was a realization seared into every witness, that humans had not simply survived the trial. They had redefined it. When the scenario ended, silence fell over the chamber. Cadets who once mocked humanity now refused to meet their eyes. Allies who had followed their lead remained shaken, grateful yet wary. The instructors, bound by duty, declared the results, but their voices carried unease. Humanity had earned not just respect, but fear. Graduation followed days later. Each species was recognized, their cadets honored for performance. When the humans stood, the hall was quiet in a way no announcement could command. There were no jeers, no dismissive laughter, only the collective awareness that a new force had stepped onto the galactic stage. Fragile bodies, short lifespans, primitive beginnings. It no longer mattered. What mattered was a truth every cadet now carried in their hearts. Humans were not to be measured by strength or time, but by will. And that will was terrifying. As they departed, whispers spread like wildfire through the halls of the War College and beyond. They were survivors. They were unpredictable. They were relentless. And the galaxy, for the first time, began to fear what would happen if humanity ever fought not in simulations, but in reality. The legend had begun, and it carried a warning. Never corner a human, for they will make the corner bleed. The weeks after graduation did not bring peace. If anything, the silence surrounding the humans grew heavier. Their victory in the trials had spread far beyond the halls of the college. Reports were carried to fleets, to senates, to war councils across the stars. Species that had dismissed humanity as an irrelevant newcomer now reviewed every fragment of data, searching for answers that never comforted them. What they found instead was the same unsettling truth. Humans did not win by being stronger, faster, or older. They won because they refused to follow the script of predictable war. In the days that followed, alien cadets whispered their experiences like survivors of a storm. The draft spoke of ambushes that unraveled their most disciplined formations. The Threxians muttered of plans destroyed not by superior firepower, but by the steady erosion of trust through misinformation. The Sorth remained bitterly silent, remembering the single duel that had shifted their perception forever. Even those who had allied with humans admitted that their victories felt less like triumphs and more like surviving beside a force that bent every rule until war itself bent with it. The faculty convened in private chambers, debating whether humanity's place in the college had been a mistake. Some argued that humanity brought dangerous innovation to institutions designed to preserve stability. Others countered that the very purpose of the college was to prepare for the unknown, and nothing was more unknown than the human capacity to adapt. In the end, consensus was impossible, and the unease only deepened. Humanity had passed the trials, but their shadows stretched larger than their numbers. For the humans themselves, the aftermath was not celebration but reflection. They understood the fear they had inspired, and they understood why. Every tactic they had used was drawn from a history written in desperation. Insurgencies against stronger forces, survival in hostile environments, unity born not from choice but necessity. To the galaxy it looked like madness, but to humans it was memory. They carried scars of wars that consumed continents, of disasters that forced them to innovate or die. They knew they had not revealed a trick, but simply shown the truth of what humanity was. As cadets dispersed to their homeworlds, the legend spread faster than official reports. Some call humans reckless. Some call them dishonorable, but many call them terrifying. Stories painted them as a species that would burn its own cities to ash if it meant dragging enemies into the fire with them. Others framed them as visionaries, capable of forging coalitions from the discarded and forgotten. No single narrative held, because humanity was never one thing. They were everything at once, fragile and ferocious, desperate and brilliant, unpredictable and unyielding. The War College had intended the trials to forge bonds among civilizations, but instead, it had created a fracture. Species that once scoffed at Earth now calculated scenarios of what might happen if humanity rose to true power. Military councils drafted countermeasures, though none agreed on what such countermeasures could be. How did one prepare for an enemy that made a weapon out of chaos itself? How did one deter those who viewed defeat as just another strategy? Within human quarters, whispers of their own spread. They knew they had changed the galaxy's perception. Some felt pride, others dread. They had shown their strength, but in doing so they had painted a target on their species. The galaxy might invite them to councils and alliances, but beneath the formalities lurked suspicion. Some humans argued this was inevitable, that fear was better than mockery, that being underestimated had always been more dangerous than being mistrusted. Others worried that fear would bring preemptive strikes, that humanity might be forced into wars it had not sought. The instructors, bound to impartiality, could no longer hide their concern. They had seen countless cadets across centuries, but never had they seen a species so willing to weaponize weakness itself. Their notes, meant for academic record, carried phrases rarely used: existential risk, unpredictable escalation, systemic destabilizer. Humanity had not just passed the trials. They had exposed vulnerabilities in doctrines thousands of years old. Every empire that thought itself safe now knew that safety was illusion. When the humans finally departed the college, their presence lingered like a warning carved into stone. They returned to Earth not as conquerors, but as students who had shown the galaxy something it had not wished to see. For the first time in generations, the elder species felt a pulse of genuine fear. They understood now that the humans' greatest danger lay not in what they were, but in what they might become when given the full stage of galactic conflict. The legend settled into every council chamber and every fleet. Never again would humanity be dismissed as fragile, primitive, or irrelevant. They had revealed themselves as a force that thrived on desperation, one that could twist chaos into victory, one that could rally the overlooked into armies. They were no longer a curiosity at the War College. They were a question the galaxy could not answer, a risk no empire could calculate, a species that made survival itself a weapon. And so, the whispers grew into a truth that even the most powerful civilizations could not ignore. Humanity was a storm. Not the largest, not the oldest, not the strongest, but the storm that could not be predicted, the storm that left nothing unchanged. The college had invited them to learn. Instead, it had unveiled a future none were ready to face. The galaxy was terrified, and it was right to be.